So Dr. Pompa, one of the things that you got really famous for is calling out bullshit online, calling out brands, speaking about toxins that are in our everyday food, personal care products, even the tea we drink. Where did your personal journey with health and wellness start? Because I know you were chronically really ill for a while.
Yeah, that's my passion around calling out toxins, because I was neurotoxic. Well, if you put a label on it, neurotoxic mediated illness, what does that mean? That means I was so dang sick and nobody knows what's wrong with you, right? It starts with fatigue. It ends continues on with brain fog, anxiety, can't sleep, gut problems, unexplainable. What the heck happened to my life? I was healthy, now I'm not. That was my life. Chased my thyroid, chased my adrenals, right? Chased it all. Avoided foods, what happened, right? And that sent me on a journey. And everything that I've now taught doctors for over 20 years, I learned in that battle, from pain to purpose. And I always like to tell this part of the story, and it means the most to me, from pain to purpose to promise. Because when I was sick looking for an answer, and we had 2 young boys at the time, life came to a screeching halt. I mean, it wasn't good. My wife's here and she could tell you her part of that story, and it was probably in some ways worse for her. It's always worse for the loved one, trying to walk you through it. It is, because, you don't know what's going on. Yeah. And she would remind me, because I'm thinking maybe I am just crazy. And she's like, you're not crazy, there's a cause. But several times, I'm sure she'd been on her knees, crying out to God for an answer. And this particular time, and it might sound crazy, but I assure you it's not, and she's not, God spoke to her very clearly that not only is he going to get me well, but I'm going to take a message to the world. And when she would tell me that, Iman, I would get very angry at her. I would, because my exact words were, I can't even get myself well. Yeah. And how dare you put that on me? But here I am. Right, here I am because of that. So she was right, or God was right through her.
I think it's always amazing that when we go through something that brings us literally to our knees, and metaphorically, and really gets us down there, and then when we come out of that situation, we finally understand the higher purpose behind it all and how everything is correlated together. So your suffering, as unfortunate as it is, feels a little bit justified, because you're like, I went through this horrible thing because so many other people are probably experiencing this. And when I healed myself, I can heal other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I always say, I could have never done it if you would have paid me any amount of money and said, figure this out. It just wouldn't.
You had to experience it.
You wouldn't do it. You had to experience it. You had to go through it. I had to try things that failed. I had to try things that worked. I had to get to the cause. And that had to be experiential. It wasn't a mission, drummed up in my brain that I'm going to do this. It just doesn't work that way. It's like I always say, it chose me. I did not choose it.
How many years were you sick?
I was pretty sick for about 4 years.
Wow. That's
where
a long time.
Yeah, it was. It started in 1999, and 2001, 2, 3 were the worst. And then the crazy thing is around that time I started feeling better, so much so that we had a new baby, and our baby was 6 weeks old. We just watched, literally, we called it a watch party, or at least my wife did. We watched a bunch of videos with the kids, watched that birth of that child. Anyway, but something, I can't even say horrible happened, but yet it was horrible. But again, it shaped me for who God needed me to be in our whole family. But Marilee's best friend growing up was her cousin Lisa. Her husband shoots her and shoots himself, and we end up with 2 7-year-old twins at the time. The boy and a girl, the boy on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, sensory integration. So our life, here I am. I remember being at a dinner with my wife, and I don't want to say celebrating, but just saying it's so good to have my life back. I wasn't all the way there by any means, right? But I was having more good days that I had hope, and hope enough to have a baby. And then we got that call and ended up with 2 kids. So we went from 2 kids to 5 in 6 weeks. And I was just getting over the hump, not there yet. So when I say I was very sick for, those 4 years, yeah, but I still wasn't well. I had massive mold sensitivity, chemical sensitivity. So I was still reacting to my environment, not in a good way. And now I have all these kids.
And you're like, We have to provide for them emotionally. We have to obviously be there for them and present for them. Yeah. Do you think that was even a bigger driver for you to be like, I need to figure this out even faster because our house is full now?
Yeah. Maybe subconsciously.
Subconsciously.
I mean, because, that's part of the thing that scared me, honestly. I was putting life back together in so many ways. And now here it is with a new battle that I wasn't ready for, but God knew that I needed it somehow.
I don't think God gives you anything unless he knows you can handle it. And through that, and it sounds crazy, but you hear about stories like what you experienced having these, going from 2 kids to 5 kids, being chronically sick for 4 years, then getting your health back. And then another thing hits you and you're like, wait, what is even going on here? You aren't handed anything that I think you can't work through because you're meant to come out on the other side with those lessons.
God had purpose in it.
Absolutely.
There's a scripture that says God works all things out for good for those who love, those who are called according to his purpose. And he did work it for good. But, I have to say, I didn't go through it faithfully maybe at the time, meaning, I was probably angry at God. I definitely felt sorry for myself. My wife definitely was the anchor. My wife was the faithful one. My wife was the one who reminded me of the promise, even though I didn't want to hear it. She was the strong one that held our family together, and she doesn't get that probably credit,
Yeah.
It's like, I'm the one out front, everyone, but it was her that God used, that's why he gave her that promise, honestly. So,
because she was open and receptive to hearing it versus you were probably shut down because you were not feeling well at all.
Yeah. My wife her gift is faith. She has faith for everyone, oftentimes but herself, right? But it's like, I think my kids now as adults running this company, my Pompa program is a company that my son is CEO of. I was training doctors for many years, and he said, Dad, you have to take it directly to people looking for answers just like you. How are we going to do that? Social media, right? So, getting the message directly to people, kids understand that better than I sure do.
And then when it came down, Dr. Pompa, to what you actually discovered, what was the root cause, if you look back, to what was driving your illness?
Yeah, neurotoxic mediated illness. What does that mean? Here we are. Yeah, I had a lot of mercury accumulation because when it started, I found Mad Hatter's disease online. Okay, I don't know if you know what that is, but people making felt hats were using mercury and actually even lead in some cases. They became known as Mad Hatters. I had every symptom from the irritability, unexplainable anger, just personality change, massive depression, I had it all. I'm like, I'm a Mad Hatter, so I went and got $5,000 worth of blood tests at Allegheny General Hospital, met with the head of toxicology, and it's going to show something. It didn't. It was like, I got the look of, he said, you're healthier than me, son, wow, this is great. And that's when I really lost hope. But one of those tests was a mercury blood test, which is the wrong test. So here we are, a year or so later. I'm working with a very bright endocrinologist and read his book. At some point, I felt like I knew his material better than him. But he said to me, I think you have mercury toxicity. It was my body temperature is up and down, et cetera. And I'm like, I thought so too. And he said, well, wrong test. It won't show up in the blood unless it was you were getting an exposure every day. Like Mad Hatters, they were getting exposed every day. But I'm thinking more chronic, Fast forward, I asked the question, well, where do you think I got it from? Well, do you have any silver amalgam fillings, Do you have any dental work around the time this happened? So I looked back at my cycling journal because I was training a lot at the time. And sure enough, days after when the fatigue started, that was the first symptom, right? Just fatigue. Most people would say. So I thought I was just training too hard. And then it was like anxiety. Then it was, all the other symptoms that were coming, but it correlated. That's my dogs. My dogs are here. But it correlated with that date. I had 2 silver fillings drilled out just randomly.
And instantly you felt that reaction.
And I did. I thought it was the anesthesia. That's what I did. I thought it was the anesthetic. I did never put 2 and 2 together. But all that
because it came on so quick.
So much. Those fillings have 50% mercury, okay? And when you drill them, it vaporizes. Now, keep in mind, I was already accumulating mercury. I wore contact lenses. 70s, 80s, and 90s, contact lens fluid has something called thimerosal. Thimerosal is a very neurotoxic form of vaccine. Okay, so that mercury I was getting from the contact lens fluid directly into my brain. And of course, I had a mouthful of fillings. So did my mother. There's a study called the DRASH study. It's a German study, one of the first to show the number of silver fillings containing 50% of mercury in mom's mouth is proportional to how much is in the baby's brain. Now, that's an autopsy
During the
study.
time of
In utero.
conception, yeah.
Yeah, so meaning mom's leaching mercury the whole time from these fillings every time they chew. If someone goes in just for fun and puts in smoking tooth video, that's a 25-year-old filling that they just rub with a pencil and watch the mercury vapor on a fluorescent screen just pour off of that filling. That's going right into our brain. Okay, mom's mercury goes into the baby's brain in utero. That was an autopsy study, very accurate. And it's the only way to look at brain mercury is actually that way. And that is the first exposure I had. You know, contact lenses. Of course, I'm sure I had other exposures. I played with mercury as a kid, you know, from thermometers. Yes. But that's not even a big exposure compared to the fillings that I had as a kid. They just put fillings in if you had a dark spot in your darn tooth, right? So all those exposures, then they drill on that filling. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, overflowed my bucket, as I like to say, and bang, my symptoms started. I was also in a low-grade moldy home at the time, right? So I was tolerating that until this happened. And by the way, one of the things that I always teach doctors is look for the perfect storm. It's typically never one thing. It could be physical, chemical, or emotional stressors. 3 storms come together, like the George Clooney movie, The Perfect Storm, and bam, that's when the genes get triggered. That's when you become sick, right? So when I'm teaching doctors, I'm saying find the perfect storm, the causative factors, remove those, and now you have a chance, you know, to get somebody truly well. Most people, even in functional medicine, it's a big criticism I have. People are buying a lot of expensive tests, doing a lot of expensive supplements, expensive biohacks. We all love a lot of those things. I do too, right? But how did I get my life back? I got to the cause of why most people are actually not well today. So we started this conversation by saying your passion is, you know, exposing these things. It's because that's why people don't feel well. That's why people have brain fog. It's more complicated than just diet, although diet is a delivery system of a lot of these toxins, right? But it is more complicated than, you know, just not getting enough sun, perhaps, although we need a lot of sun. I could talk about a lot of good things, but no, it's the level of these types of toxins that in the scientific literature, they call persistent toxins. What that means is they bioaccumulate in our tissue. So when our government protective bodies tell us that this amount of mercury, lead, or arsenic, or aluminum is safe, they are not considering that it's accumulating in our tissue, and they're not considering your other toxins that you accumulated that shut down your cellular detox pathways, and now you're accumulating these things and you're wondering why. What the heck is going on? You've changed your diet. You still don't feel well. You're exercising, or at least if you have the energy. You know, you can't lose weight anymore. Your energy, your brain fog, you can't sleep. What's going on? 99% of the time, you have an accumulation of these types of toxins.
My morning coffee is part of a ritual for me. It is from the first sip to the last sip is something I really enjoy. So being able to do that and consume coffee that does not leave me feeling sick, nervous, or anxious, or with jitters is such a true pleasure. And that is why I'm so excited to also bring you Life Boost Coffee. Imagine starting your day every morning with a rich, smooth coffee that is USDA certified, because what you guys do not know, coffee tends to carry a lot of mold, and most commercial coffees have mold 80% of the time due to how they're manufactured and how they're stored. Life Boost is sourced from single origin farms and scientifically tested for over 415 different toxins. Things like mold, mycotoxins, pesticides, herbicides, and even heavy metals. It's so gentle, comes in different flavors and different strengths, and does not leave you feeling jittery or stressed out after. So you can enjoy your morning cup of coffee without any side effects and have a beautiful start to your day. So therefore, I'm so excited we've partnered with Life Boost Coffee to bring our Biohack-it community an incredible offer. Our listeners are getting 10% off their Life Boost Coffee to give it a try, and I promise you guys, you will not be disappointed. So head to Life Boost Coffee and use the code below. And I promise you, you will be left with a smile on your face, feeling grounded and caffeinated in the right way. And let's get back to the show. When you look at people and speak to people and when you're training up doctors, what do you think the number one root cause for why people are chronically inflamed? Because inflammation is off the charts these days. And people like me even come back, and I just recently got some blood work done and my inflammation markers were off the charts. I eat clean. Yes, I eat clean. I have a non-toxic house. I have no mold exposure, but my inflammation was off the charts. And I'm thinking to myself, if somebody like me who's so educated, who's in the space, is feeling this way, what is going on with the rest of the world?
That's right. Well, bingo. You made my point for me, right? The level of toxicity that we all are exposed to, and I and you do our best to avoid it. I don't drink out of plastic bottles. I say no, thank you. Right? I mean, I do the best I can. That said, we have so many exposures we cannot control. Right? From aluminum falling out of the sky. Why? Because it's in jet fuel to make the planes fly. They're more efficient. It's a simple dollars and cents. They save millions of dollars, if not billions, by putting a chemical concoction in jet fuel so they can fly longer and it's a more efficient fuel. They're saving millions, but we're getting toxic because aluminum now is ubiquitous in our society. Oh, and the fact that you got a lot of mercury from your mother, as we just discussed, and aluminum and mercury have a high lethal dose value together. We know it causes brain problems, starting with brain fog, leading to dementia, Alzheimer's, et cetera, neurodegenerative conditions. Okay, so the answer to your question is look, yes, do genetics play a role? Yes, some people are gifted with some better pathways to get rid of the stuff. But today, I don't care how good your pathways are. We're all accumulating these toxins at a higher rate. If you look at the forever chemicals that I expose on my Instagram, right? These are chemicals that we know are causing cancer, endocrine disruption, meaning hormone problems, hormone dysregulation. We are exposed to heavy metals in so many different things, as we just discussed. To your point, you mentioned mold. 70% of all homes in the United States have mold, and they're unknowing to the people that live in them because of the way we're building homes, okay? And then we're the plastic accumulation, right? So think about it. The personal care products, what are you washing your clothes in that have all these neurotoxins? Every fragrance that is in every product that people are rubbing on their skin, using in their hair, washing their clothes with, those fragrances, they're protected by intellectual property laws, right? That allow them to not tell us what's in their product. Oh, and you know what? It's banned substances that are
in other countries,
cancer causer, hormone. Yeah, all of these other countries have banned them. But oh no, here we're allowed to be, to put those in the products, and they're exposing us and our families. So we wonder why we're so sick. So my point is this: it's not as easy as just changing your diet. Yes, change your diet, please. Drink clean water, please. Avoid these sources. But my cellular detox is what I'm passionate about. It saved my life, millions of others now, because I've trained so many doctors and my own program. But you have to do detox correctly. It's not as simple as sitting in a sauna. Trust me, I love saunas. It's not as simple as doing a lot of fun biohacks that we love. If it were only so easy, you have to upregulate the cells to what they do. God designed our cells to get rid of toxins day in, day out. Once that gets downregulated, now you start accumulating, your genes start getting triggered, your cellular energy starts dying, and now nothing works. All your biohacks, nothing works.
I want to talk a little bit more in depth for our audience listening about your true cellular detox. What is the detox? How long is it? What does it entail? And can you maybe walk me through at the end of that, maybe a really severe case besides yours that was turned around using this detox?
Yeah, a lot of those, by the way. I'll tell you a fun story around that. It ties into that question. My program, we have a 5-month program and a year program. And the reason why is most people will say, oh, I did it. I'm using heavy metals as an example, or I could use mold. I did a heavy metal detox and already. So I'm kind of saying like, I did that. I still don't feel good. Okay. Heavy metals are accumulated in tissue, in the brain. And that's really where the big problem is, right? That was my problem. It's years, not months. You don't do a heavy metal program for 3 months, let alone the 10-day cleanse that most people are trying to do and think, oh, I heard it from a friend of mine yesterday who I'm staying with. Oh, I've done a lot of detox. What did you do? And then the gentleman who I trained was like, Well, you didn't do his detox. And how long did you do it for? He did the hard work for me, saying like, yeah, okay, you didn't even touch what's in your brain. Yeah, you didn't touch what's in your tissue, in your cells of your body. So our goal with the program is to teach people the process so they can do it long enough to matter. When I had a clinic and I was doing this for people, it wasn't as effective as now I have a virtual program. Why? Because we are now forced to teach people the process. And it's different for everyone. It's different for you than it is me. The chelators, the things we're using, the support you need is going to be different than the next person. So you can't just put detox in a box and say, here, do this cleanse. It's not like that. Right. 20 years of teaching this, what's going on with you is a little different than the next person. Your sources were different. Therefore, your chelators might be different. Therefore, your support might be different. But I'll promise you this, your doses are always different. Some people do better with bigger doses, honestly, and feel better. Some people do better with smaller doses more often and feel better. So the point is there's an art and science to this, and that's what I'm passionate about because I taught it. But look, it's real. And it's like in my biggest frustration in our space is that people aren't doing things that are real. They're doing things that are convenient. They're doing things that are easy, but they're not doing the things that are actually real. I have better conversations around detox with scientists than I do doctors. Yeah. It's like detox in our space. It's kind of like health or nutrition in our government. It doesn't go away. Bad things, myths don't go away. Fat's bad, right? Calories in, calories out. I mean, I could go through a whole thing that most people still believe because our government still talks about it, right? Yeah.
Cholesterol is bad.
Cholesterol is bad, right? I mean, I could go down a list. But the fact is that's the way it is in our space with detox. They think chlorella is like the metal magnet. If it were only so easy, it's not. So anyway, I get a little riled up there, but
no, but
it's because that's
it's important for people to know. Is this mainly done through supplementation, or do you also partner with clinics to do anything through IVs?
Well, look, IV chelation is very dangerous because you're putting in a large amount of a chelator. It goes away. So now I said there's an art and science to detox. This is the science, okay? It has a half-life, meaning how long it stays in your body, right, in your blood system, and then it goes out of the body. Problem is then you get a massive amount of redistribution. So chelators, you have to take them within their half-life. So you have to take them frequent enough to not get this redistribution. Then you have to take them for a certain amount of days in a cycle to where when you stop, you don't get this redistribution. So when people do an IV of, say, EDTA, DMPS, phosphatidylcholine is not a chelator, so I would be okay with an IV of phosphatidylcholine. But when you're using chelators for detox, they come in, they go away, you go home, and now you're redistributing heavy metals.
Right.
You see, that's the problem. But a lot of people in our space are using weak chelators that don't really have a bond that holds on and doesn't let go. So they're using a lot of plant chelators that cause redistribution as well. That's the science of detox. The art is figuring out what's good for you.
What's good for each individual person. And so in going back to a case that you look back at and you're like, wow, I want to know about a case that was...
Okay, so I said there's a fun one. So a gal named Ava, who some people, beautiful girl, and people make fun of her eyebrows because they think they're fake, but they're real. Anyways, I
need the picture of this person now.
Yeah, okay. So anyways, So she was 17. She got very sick, bedbound for a year and a half. What happened? Multiple exposures, perfect storm. I typically didn't take on teenagers because they typically don't listen. I could tell within short order this gal was different. I took her on. Anyways, we figure out her big causes that were missed. Her father, he wasn't, wealthy by any means, but they had her at the Mayo Clinic. Every clinic, they were paying out of pocket for every treatment. I mean, they were going everywhere, doing everything. In my first meeting with her, I realized they missed it. Like they didn't even ask these right questions. And her mother was even said, no one has ever asked us those questions before. Anyways, fast forward, I get her well. Fast forward again. My son says, I'm going to Indiana. And I'm like, why are you going to Indiana tomorrow? He says, and he got this little grin on his face that he gets. He's like, well, I'm seeing a girl. Who's in Indiana?
Yeah.
And then my brain was like, oh no. Ava.
Ava's.
Yeah, Ava's.
Is she now your daughter-in-law?
She's my daughter-in-law now.
I just
That's why
clocked
it's a
that from
funny
social
story.
media.
Yeah, now
Okay,
you're bringing down the eyebrows.
She's
social media.
beautiful.
So
Yes,
Ava,
yes, yes.
exactly. So anyways, I said, Daniel, don't even do it. No. I said, that's a good family. I'm thinking he's going to go there and mess everything up, right? Anyways, he marries Ava. So it was all good intentions.
Okay.
I have my first grandchild.
I saw that.
You know, but I mean, Ava was so sick. You know, she's told her story publicly out on social media, right? And how sick she was. She had Lyme diagnosis. You know, she had an accumulation of heavy metals, mercury. I mean, she had a lot of neurotoxic things. She had a perfect storm of things how she ended up there. And again, it was getting to that cause, how she got her life back. She's passionate about it, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
She's on the mission. She's part of the family.
Part of the Pompa family now.
Yeah, exactly. So.
You know, so you talked a lot about how there are three, almost like a stool, and there are three legs to it. You have your emotional health. You have obviously this overstimulation of getting bombarded with toxins, and then it's the detox pathways. So I last year did a lot of the phosphatidylcholine IVs. I had babesia that I discovered that I went to Africa for safari, came back with babesia, was having night sweats and all of that. Did not know what it was.
Which is a bacteria that can drive Lyme disease and other illnesses like chronic fatigue. Yeah.
And so I was experiencing that. I go do all these PC IVs and stuff, try to get rid of it, try to take pharmaceuticals for the babesia and stuff. Dr. Pompa, the babesia still has not left my body because my nervous system has been so unregulated. And so I had a doctor turn around and tell me that, Iman, doesn't matter what you give yourself, but until you get out of fight or flight when it comes to your nervous system.
It's called a cellular danger response.
Okay, so we want to talk about that because I bet you so many people are like, oh, I'll just take this pill, I'll take this pharmaceutical drug, I'll do this. But it's not leaving because it goes back to your nervous system.
Absolutely. Well, look, Iman, there's so many people are dealing with this, right?
Right?
Okay, first off, right, you will never get the bacteria completely out, just like you'll never, eradicate all Candida or Epstein-Barr virus, right? So these are all opportunistic pathogens that when your immune system is distracted, they will take over. And yes, you have to beat them back at times. However, you will not eradicate them. Your immune system, your neuroimmune system has to get to the point where it has it okay. And
we're good.
That's right. Now, at any moment, so you could have a massive stress. Let's say you got into, God forbid, a horrible car accident. You were under a lot of emotional stress and you were in a moldy home at the same time. You could be re-triggered and all of a sudden I feel like I have Lyme again because now your immune system went like this, force field down, and now these pathogens come out. A lot of people chase parasites, Epstein-Barr, all these things. And again, there's a time to beat them back. But unless you deal with the thing that's actually taking your force field down, then you will still continue to battle those pathogens. So again, there's certain parts of the United States that 90% of the people who have Lyme disease, babesia, et cetera, why aren't they all sick? 80-some percentage of the population has Epstein-Barr, right? Why aren't they all sick? Because their immune system has it in check. So the better question is how do I bolster my force field? How do I get my immune system fighting for me? Okay, that's when you have to look at all these accumulated toxins that are keeping you in that cellular danger response. Your body thinks it's saving its life. Your body's keeping you in this sympathetic dominant state, and what happens is that affects your immune system and it lets these pathogens continue to go on, which makes the problem even worse. So you get the point. It's this catch-22. But where most people go wrong is they're not getting rid of the bioaccumulated toxins that are actually keeping the force field down. And that's what I teach. And
when people are on this cellular detox program of yours, is it through a bunch of herbs, supplementation, diet, sleep?
There's a core of products that I developed over the years, and that core is used very differently and dosed very differently, right? So someone gets a coach and they are worked individually with that coach from that core. And then again, depending on what their major perfect storm is, exposures, causes, if you will, then they're dealing directly with that. We work with a lot of special dentists across the country. Because dentistry plays a big role. People have hidden infections, like your babesia could be hiding in something called a cavitation, which you had a root canal out, say, when you were a teenager, or a root canal. You could have a root canal, that's one, but a wisdom tooth out as a teenager. the tooth's gone, but it heals over, and now you have this little hiding place with low blood flow that is the babesia, other pathogens hide there. And again, keeping your force field down because they're leaching into the bloodstream from this area. So oftentimes we have to work with dentists to make sure that people don't have these hidden infections.
Like biological dentists,
right? Biological, but not all biological dentists because they'll take out mercury safely, but a lot of them don't understand the proper protocol for cavitation removal. We need something called a cone beam, which is a 3D X-ray that you have to have special software to read. A lot of dentists read them like plain films, mistake. And then you have to have special lasers. There's a process, that has gotten better even over the last 2 years to deal with these cavitations. That's one example. You have to look at people's workspaces. You have to look at people's homes for different bacterias that build up because of water, mold, obviously, certain VOCs, volatile organic chemicals, compounds that keep people sick. So, I mean, all of these things need addressed. And if you get those things addressed, the big exposures, now you have a chance to get the cells upregulated and the body removing the toxins. The immune system comes on board. All of a sudden, hey, it's like these pathogens that I was fighting back. That happened to me. I was constantly dealing with parasite infection. I was constantly dealing with candida stuff, beat it back. And it just kept coming back because my mercury levels were so high that my immune system couldn't come on board.
So it's so funny. I have had my wisdom teeth all taken out. I've also had a lot of extractions when I was a child. Instead of making more room in my mouth.
I used to do that.
They used to just pull everything out. I'm 42, so back then they used to just be like extract.
Exactly.
Put in braces, and instead of creating more room in my mouth for the teeth to actually fit.
Yeah, there's a whole different philosophy now, right? They would. Hopefully people aren't getting that done today, right? Yeah, we want to expand, right, the jaw, make room that way. But all those teeth you had extracted, every one of those need evaluated by the right dentist with a cone beam, with the right software to make sure you don't have cavitation. And again, think of little caves that the animals, the pathogens back up in, protect themselves, hide from your immune system, and you will never eradicate them unless you get rid of those caves. So it's part of a perfect storm. It may not even be the thing that got you sick,
but it's what's keeping me sick because that's where the babesia might be hiding.
Bingo, right there.
And so how many good biological dentists are there in America? Because they're not that easy to come by.
There's not. People go to the IAOMT.org. You can find a biological dentist there. But again, I warn you, not all of them even do great biological dentistry. Not all of them definitely do cavitation work. There is a growing number. So much has shifted in the last 2 years. I am the number one dental referral in the world because so many people in my program, and this is something we have to rule out in sick people that have tried everything, as an example. And so we have dentists now around the country who are very trained. How many? I don't know. I mean, really good ones. I hope that there's a couple hundred.
Right, not even, yeah. And I just think it's another thing, for anybody listening, if they're having signs and symptoms, right, how do they get tested for this to then contact somebody like yourself and your team and your program to then get referred out? But how would they even know, how do I even test for this?
Yeah. Well, again, what are we testing for, right? I've mentioned testing homes.
You
knew.
Office space.
You said, I don't have mold. So what that told me is she's privy enough to go, I better make sure I don't have mold, right? So, but even that, I warn people because I would say almost 100% of the people that I would sit down with would say, yeah, I checked for mold. Oh, what did you do? I did an air test. They came in. Yeah. Most air tests are negative, because the mold's behind the wall. Molds like Stachybotrys don't even put out a spore, that they're very difficult to pick up in an air test. And it depends on how positively or negatively pressured the home is. But so you have to test behind walls. Dust testing is a better way to look at tests. Bacteria testing now is a better way. What is dust
testing, by the way?
So you're testing the dust for more of a history of the mold of this building, okay, for example. And you're going to find a different level of exposure there than the air, for
Can
example.
2 people live in the same house and one show up with mold exposure and one not because one has better detoxification?
Yeah, like I said, genetics plays a role, but I think it's overblown honestly. I think the person who gets sick, to your point, let's say that, there's a moldy home and 4 people in the home, 2 are very sick, the other 2 are, maybe one's very sick. Genetics do play some role, but what we have found is more importantly, it's how filled up someone's bucket is, meaning how many other neurotoxic exposure that they already dealt with. And then this becomes the final straw that breaks the camel's back. I like to, sometimes I have 2 glasses of water. You visualize this with me and those listening, so we can do it just thinking about it. I have one glass that's filled to the very, very rim, not quite overflowing, but right there. Then I have one glass that's maybe a third filled. The one that's just a third filled, I could shake that and stress it. Life goes on. No brain. You don't see any water spilling. This one, I just stress it a little bit and you see the water coming over. This is where many people are living their lives with that just little stress. I'm feeling better now. I'm feeling better. But then a little stress comes in. I'm not feeling better. They travel. They don't feel good. Their bucket's too full, right? So it's like how we get them well is we have to empty that stress bucket. Now, remember, that could be physical, chemical, and emotional stress. All of it, the body doesn't even know the difference. So your traumas in your life are filling that bucket too, right? But then that little bit of stress. And it could be, so the person in the moldy home, right, that gets sick, I believe they're this person. This person tolerated it for another 10 years. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
Just like the silver fillings. My husband has a mouthful, he's fine. Yeah, his bucket's still here for now, right? Because he didn't have a lot of infection. He didn't have different exposures. He grew up differently than you, et cetera, et cetera.
And so when it comes to this book, always fascinates me. It's called The Body Keeps Score. And you talked about something right now that your emotional body also matters because that can also be a trigger that sets you off. How, when you're working with patients or clients are coming through and your coaches are training them and stuff, when people have a lot of emotional stress in their life, how do you navigate them away from that? Because you can give someone, put them on a detox, give them supplementation, get mold out of their system, but your emotional body is a lot harder to regulate. So how do you actually advise people to target that?
I always correctly, I feel, say, I'm not the expert there. I am the expert in the chemical part of that, right? I have interviewed on my podcast some incredible experts in that, and I would never even put myself in that. However, that said, I recognize that it is part of the perfect storm that keeps people sick. I think there's a lot of great techniques, EMDR, right? I mean, you could go down a list of a lot of different things that, and I would argue that work better for certain things work better for some people than others, but you have to deal with it just like you do those toxins.
Right.
If you sat in front of somebody and all your emotional traumas came out, you'd probably die. You'd definitely go into a state of depression and end up isolated. Your body would shut down. Yeah, exactly. So they have to come out slowly. I say that to, again, people that think, oh, I did a detox for 3 months, 10 days, whatever it is. Hilarious. It's like dealing with your emotional traumas. No, they have to come out in layers. As your innate intelligence allows them to surface in your conscious mind, because a lot of it's bringing it to the awareness of the conscious mind, right? And then you're dealing with it, and then you're okay with it, right? That same process absolutely has to happen at the chemical level as well as the emotional trauma level. Right. But you have to detox it. Yes, you do. And you asked me what I do. I mean, or what I like
to recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that I had said that, you hear a lot of things from a lot of people that help them, from mushrooms to different things and I think that you have to find what you believe in.
Works for you as an individual. I have seen this research. So 30% more women develop autoimmune disease than men. So they're more susceptible to it. Do you think that's down to they're just more sensitive to environments, or do you think that's down to the over increase in our personal care products versus men's personal care products? Like, why are more women susceptible to autoimmunity than men?
I think when you look at it, though, also women are more protected from other conditions too, right? Men have more heart attacks, right? So I think that women, I think a lot of their gift of intuition brings on, they hold stress different. You mentioned my three-legged stool analogy. The three-legged stool, I give it as an analogy of how people get sick. And I love it, especially for autoimmune. A three-legged stool of autoimmune, I wrote an article about it. But a certain gene gets turned on. The old dogma was, oh, you just got Hashimoto's because your mother had it.
Yeah.
That's bunk, okay? Epigenetics mean those genes get triggered. The science shows you can turn off those genes, right? If you get rid of the thing that turned them on. So if we look at what triggers genes, okay, so one leg is a gene can get triggered, and we all have susceptibilities, right? So the gene gets turned on, but it can be turned off, epigenetics. The other leg of the stool is the stressors in a perfect storm that turn on the gene. So now we're back to my work of, if we get to those big stressors, if you're living in a moldy home, oh yeah, you're triggering genes. You know, it's a matter of when. And then we have to get rid of that stress, and then we can turn off the gene. But there's one more leg of the stool, your microbiome, right? Your microbiome makes certain bacteria that you need for your brain to function normally, right? Your microbiome has certain bacteria that your immune system needs to make something called a T regulatory cell. Those are cells that tell your immune system, it's okay, back down, right? So T regulatory, so they regulate your immunity. Well, wait a minute. So what you're saying is, if I don't have enough of these bacteria that are very sensitive to certain toxins, so think about that leg of the stool, the same toxins that turned on the gene can be the same toxins that are diminishing these specific bacteria that are very sensitive to these toxins. And now you don't have enough of them, so you don't make enough T-reg cells, autoimmune, three-legged stool. So many practitioners just trying to treat the microbiome. Well, you got to think about these stressors that are actually affecting the microbiome and turning on the gene, right? And then you have to do the appropriate cellular work to turn off the gene, and you have to deal with that's why I'm saying, so these three things, if you know the analogy of a three-legged stool, have to be there for you to get sick, right? Otherwise the stool doesn't stand up, the analogy of a three-legged stool. But the analogy is they all have to be dealt with. And most practitioners, even functional medicine, alternative, are only dealing with one, two legs of the stool and not all three.
Addressing all. So with that theory of the three-legged stool, then it should be really possible to reverse autoimmune disorders in women, like things like Hashimoto's, which is one of the most common one that women are attacked with.
Ava had Hashimoto's, full diagnosis. A gal, Andrea, who you spoke to, right?
Yeah.
Full Hashimoto's. How did she end up working with me? Because, fixed her body fixed her Hashimoto's, right? But yeah, full-blown Hashimoto's. Oh, and other stacking autoimmune, right? Because once you get one autoimmune, they start to stack. Your body's attacking itself, and we just name them by what tissue. Lupus, oh, that just means your autoimmune is attacking your skin. Okay, well, rheumatoid arthritis, it's now attacking your joint.
Yeah.
It's like, so we name them on what your body's attacking, but isn't it the same problem?
Yeah.
Your body's attacking its tissues and cells, and it shouldn't be.
If you are taking protein powder, you definitely need to hear this. The Clean Label Project tested 160 different proteins from different vendors and brands across the US. And you're going to be shocked at the discovery that they made. Nearly half of the top selling proteins in the US tested high for lead. And if you're somebody who consumes protein powders daily, this is something you have to be concerned about. And to make matters worse, most brands do not value transparency and will not reveal their test data online. And I want my community, like myself, to always make an informed choice of what they want to be exposed to and how they consume their daily protein. And that is why I love Puri. I also sat down with the founder and had a full, honest, transparent conversation with him about how they source, how they educate their consumer, and also what their products offer on the market, which sets them apart. Their Puri PW1 protein tastes absolutely exceptional, and you know you're not getting the gunk of heavy metals in it to start your morning with. And that is why I absolutely love Puri's PW1 whey protein, and that is how I choose to start my day every morning. Every single batch is third-party tested by the Clean Label Project, and no product is ever sold unless it passes these tests. And Puri is one of the only brands in the US that has the Clean Label product certification on their products. And that is only possible because they make all their third-party testing completely transparently available to the consumer through a QR code where you can track the exact journey of the batch of product that you're purchasing. So you guys can see for yourself exactly how clean the PW1 that you're consuming in the morning is. Every single serving gives you 21 grams of minimally processed, high quality, bioavailable protein. It comes from pasture raised cows No GMOs, no hormones, no herbicides, no pesticides, and definitely no heavy metals. So this means I can start my day with confidence knowing I'm having something super clean to support my skeletal muscle mass. My personal favorite flavor is the berberine vanilla. No artificial flavors and no funky aftertaste. So make sure your daily protein powder is not hiding any nasty chemicals and they're not being open and transparent with you. So if you want something clean, delicious, and bioavailable with transparency, go now to get this amazing discount. PURI.com, Puri.com/biohack-it. Switch over to Puri's PW1 protein and you can thank me later. I know you're also really passionate about talking about GLP-1s online. So I want to tell my audience your take on GLP-1s. Natural, pharmaceutical, should they be used, should not they be used? And what is the baseline issue? Why are people even having to turn to GLP-1s?
Yeah. They're having to turn to GLP-1s for many reasons. Number one, weight loss resistance is a new thing, meaning you've changed your diet. You're eating better than all your friends. You're exercising more than all your friends. You're doing everything right, if we put quotes around it, and you still can't lose weight. Okay, that's a hormone problem, but it's a cellular problem. Because when your hormones can't get into the cell because toxins inflame the cell, now it doesn't matter how many hormones you take, what you do, you can't lose weight, you still don't feel well, you don't have energy, you have brain fog. That is a cellular inflammation problem driven mostly by toxins. And I would add some like vegetable oil, canola oils, all these bad oils, like a lot of reasons. But this is a new problem, the inability to lose weight. That's why so many people are reaching for GLP-1. There's another reason. We talked about how toxins are decimating our microbiome, our good bacteria. Well, you make certain bacteria help you, like you need certain bacteria to make those T regulatory cells that affect autoimmune. Well, you need certain bacteria to make GLP-1 hormone.
Right.
And so many people are diminished in it. So here's what happens. They hear their friend that took it and they feel better. They even feel less inflamed. Well, because they were just like someone who takes a hormone that was low. But here's the problem. Your body regulates this in such great communication with your microbiome, how much it needs, when it needs it, in a perfect balance, just like any other hormone. And so when we come in and start giving it, our body starts not producing it. And as we all know, it becomes impossible to come off of this. This is going to end badly. And I know I get a lot of hate mail around it. I know people are doing low dose and it's like, and they're going to tell their story, how good they feel for now. But the problem is they too are going to have trouble coming off of it. And we're trying to force a hormone on the body and say, we know best and violate innate intelligence. I'm telling you, I'm right on this. And it's going to be maybe 5 years before the whole thing blows up. It's already blowing up because now it's affecting the eyes more than we thought. It's affecting all these things because we're putting in an amount of a hormone that innate intelligence should be regulating. It's a fail. This whole thing's a fail.
Do you think because I've had a lot of guests on the podcast who've talked about from a menopause perspective, women going on a low dose trizepatide, very, very microdose of it has helped people, women especially, who are going through menopause with the mood changes, with the inflammation, with the weight. Do you think even for them it would be a danger?
Well, here's the thing. I'm the first to say that it's going to help these people, but the problem
short
is,
term.
Yes, it's not looking at the long-term game, right? So listen, there's a time and a place to take a hormone, period, especially when you don't have a gland that produces it. Right? Full hysterectomy, you're probably gonna have to reach the hormone. But this is still, it doesn't make the game any easier to play because you're still going, okay, innate intelligence, I know best, right? Because throughout the day, if you look at your testosterone, thyroid hormone, when you do a blood test for thyroid hormone, are you doing it in the morning or at night? Because you're going to get different results.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so meaning that what's happening is innate intelligence regulates hormones as it needs it. There's cortisol goes up, this adjusts, testosterone adjusts. All these things are going on because your body knows so well. When we come in and give a hormone, we're putting a flat curve in there. And again, I'm not saying there's not a time for that. Okay, so
but people are on it permanently, and that becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And again, if you don't have a gland, you're going to have to take probably a certain hormone permanently, right? But this whole microbiome disruption. What about taking a bacteria like Akkermansia?
Yeah.
And we're discovering other ones that play into your body, helping it produce its own GLP-1. That is a better option because it's not shutting down your own production. It's supporting your production. So I think we're learning better options. And I think those people would benefit from, some of those solutions as well. Look, I mean, who am I to sit here and, a woman or someone's life is absolutely unlivable for whatever reason. And GLP-1 has made that better for them. Who am I to say the stress of this or the problem with this? Maybe they say, you know what, I'm going to take it my whole life and I don't care. I'd say, yeah, I get that. So I'm not, I'm not saying that I know your situation.
Right.
I'm saying that as a whole, this thing's going to blow up.
And I know the research that just came out that affects your eyesight.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's come out more recently that people may not
the
know
major
about?
gut problems that it's causing, with shocking people like, oh, wow, like we didn't know, because now people have been on them for longer, right? So, and this is not going to, decrease. It's going to increase of what we keep finding out, that because we're forcing this hormone, that things are happening to the negative.
And when it comes to when we're going back a little bit to looking at things like environmental toxins, right? Obviously people can look at their home and the mold and stuff, but in plain sight, where are the most toxins hiding that you're picking up on? And somebody's coming to you as a patient, they're like, oh, Dr. Pompa, we cleared our home, we're not drinking out of plastic, we're eating organic, but where else are those sneaky toxins hiding?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Thank God we talked about moldy homes, because that's a big hidden space. We talked about cavitations. That's a big hidden space, right? I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of heavy metals they've accumulated through
over
their
the
lifetime.
years.
Yeah, and that's a big hidden problem. You can't, here's another big problem with that, right? There's not one perfect heavy metal test without biopsying the brain. Because a lot of people who even do a heavy metal challenge like I did, where you're looking at the urine, you take a chelator and look at it, which is a better way to do it. We're still not looking what's in the brain. And a lot of people who do that challenge test and have the worst heavy metal issues, like autistic children, it's here and it doesn't show up. It doesn't show up in the hair, doesn't show up in the urine, doesn't show up in the blood. So testing is very hard for heavy metals, and therefore a lot of people are sick because they've accumulated a lot of heavy metals. Here's one that is passionate you're about, because some of it is exposure. I think women underestimate, men in that category too, just women use more personal care products, on average double. The amount of toxicity, hormone disruptors they're getting from their personal care products.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's a little bit day in, day out. Once, probably twice a day, day in, day out.
Poisoning yourself a little bit every single day.
Absolutely. And again, that's what people aren't realizing. And then it's accumulating. And then then many women are living now in a low-grade moldy home that's stressing their cellular detox pathways. And now they're accumulating all these toxins from all their personal care products, from their makeup, their hair. So I think women are choosing better products. People are becoming more sensitive to these chemicals. I interviewed Jenny McCarthy on my podcast. She has her own line now, because she realized that I'm reacting to so many of these products that I'm using. And so many of them have phthalates and different hormone disruptors that are in the personal care products.
What is your take on when we talk about testing? Because if you think about blood testing, right, if we really think about it, it can be so helpful, but it's just a snapshot in time, right?
Yeah.
So when people come to you with just their blood work and they haven't done any other testing, how likely are you and your team to be like, okay, this is a be all and end all of things?
Yeah, blood testing, it can be helpful for certain things, especially certain deficiencies. I mean, even then, right? Because deficiencies, certain ones, vitamin D shows up in the blood. It's fat soluble. But like water soluble deficiencies, that's not going to show up. And matter of fact, sometimes when people have a lot in the blood, B12, for example, they're not getting it in the cell. So it's not what people think. Blood work, you could look at liver enzymes and go, holy cow, your liver's stressed. But that's typically so far down a level of toxicity and problems and infections that your liver enzymes would rise, right? So is it helpful? Yes. But is it helpful for the person who's just not feeling well, has anxiety, has brain fog, doesn't have energy to get through a day? Typically their blood work's normal, and it's very frustrating. The first blood marker that goes off is thyroid. Reason why is because thyroid is the canary in the coal mine. What do I mean by that? I date myself with that comment. They used to literally bring canaries in coal mines, and when the canary would die, because they're so sensitive to certain toxins and gases, the canary would die, the miners knew they had a certain amount of time to get out of the mine. Now today we have sophisticated equipment for that, but the point is the thyroid is very sensitive. So you see that go south first, especially in women. So when I always said, I just looked at a blood test for someone yesterday and everything was normal, thyroid, TPO antibodies, her own immune system was attacking her thyroid. She really didn't have symptoms, I would say, except maybe weight loss resistance, right? But, not sick, a healthy woman. And yet her own immune system was attacking the thyroid. That's a toxicity issue.
And this is what I think a lot of people get wrong, right? So what other testing would you recommend for people? So blood work may just be like, if you're getting your blood work done and you're listening to this and your blood work is not coming up that bad, but you're still feeling really, really sick and no one's being able to answer the question for you, what other tests should they then look towards?
Yeah, look, I'm not the over tester. I think because a lot of people, maybe because I've been through it, right?
Of course.
I was on the other side of it. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on tests only to be discouraged, right? When it really came about figuring out what my perfect storm was. That's how I got my life back. That's how Ava got her life back. Andrea, all these people got their lives back. That said, I'm not saying that
testing is not.
I'm not saying you don't do testing, right? I'm just saying, it's overblown, a lot of the tests, even the microbiome tests that people are doing. If you did the microbiome test a week later, you'd see a different microbiome.
It depends on what you've been eating that week.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And depending on even what stresses you're under, right? Blood work, as we already pointed out, very transient. If you do it in the morning versus the afternoon, you could get different results for different things, right? It only shows some major issues, not the minor issues. So, but it still can be utilized specifically. I think the genetic testing is fun. I think it gives ideas, but it's not helping people. Most people that don't feel well have done it already. But I think it's, okay, great. I can support my methylation a little better. I can do this a little better. But it's not the end all be all.
I also want to get into, because we talked about the gut microbiome, how it can change from week to week. So the carnivore and keto diet have become like really mainstream. People are talking about it all over online. What is your take on the real value of being on one of these diets, and how should people really be cycling these diets in and out? And a man versus a woman.
Yeah, exactly. And it is very different, by the way, right? I've taught fasting for years. I've studied fasting since the 1990s. I love fasting, but now today you have a lot of people doing too much fasting. So I go to these seminars and my thing is the feast is as important as the fast. And as you know, I teach something called diet variation, feast, famine, cycling, of how important it is to change your diet. I love keto diets, but I wouldn't stay on one. I love carnivore diets, especially for autoimmune, but you can't stay on them. I love plant-based diets, but I would never stay on one, right? So I can't say I love vegan diets, but for a short period of time, it could be beneficial. I would never stay on one. The point is that I'm not a proponent of just one diet. I believe that we are meant as humans to change diet. Our ancestors were forced to change diet, environmental changes, food scarcity, etc. Today, we can eat the same 8 foods, and most people do. It's the worst thing to monoculture your microbiome. So we need to rotate and change diets, but it's very difficult for people. You literally have to give them diet plans to do it. Even people that are intermittent fasting, they're eating their 1 or 2 meals a day and they're doing it again and again. Most of them end up in a state where the body thinks it's starving and it starts to work against them, although in the beginning it worked for them. Every diet typically works for somebody. That's how they end up so passionate. A vegan ends up passionate about a vegan diet. Because it worked for them. Typically because it helped them. They felt better. They cleaned up their diet. A paleo person ends up on a paleo diet passionate about it because they switched that diet and it helped them. The problem is they're not looking at the fact that now they really could benefit from a higher healthy carbohydrate diet.
Right. So typically, how long should somebody be on a carnivore keto, like a high protein, high carb diet? Like, what is the ideal window for somebody being on it? Yeah, I mean, I think there's the Ayurvedic way of diet, seasonal changes makes a lot of sense. Meaning, wintertime, ancient cultures would absolutely move to a keto carnivore diet because they had to. It got them through the winter. Summertime or springtime would come, berries would start coming out. I think if you follow that type of eating,
I think that is the healthiest thing you can do.
Right.
But the problem is we go into a grocery store and we can get berries any time of the year, right? So that makes it a little harder because you don't know.
You're not eating seasonally.
Yeah, exactly. But seasonal eating, I think, is a really good way to rotate your diet. I get bored in diets. I move in and out of keto, more often than, it's like, I'm just going to go keto for a couple weeks. But I'm very metabolically flexible that I can get into keto very quickly. And I can move out and very quick. Most people aren't able to do that. So longer spans will typically help them better.
So when we talk about being metabolically flexible, what does that mean for somebody listening? They're like, what is being metabolically flexible, and how can I tell if I am or am not metabolically flexible?
You're asking great questions. That this is a really good thing for people to learn. Your cells can only use two things for energy, sugar or fat. Okay, so someone who's metabolically flexible has the mitochondrial ability, that's where you burn fat, that's where you make energy, to, when it's not eating, burn fat. So at night, you're not eating.
Yeah.
If you're metabolically flexible, you're burning fat. Oh, and you wake up in the morning, you appear literally leaner. Your body feasted from its fat. Okay, but some people, and by the way, when you eat carbohydrates or sugar, you burn that. So that's flexibility. That's healthy. That's the way our cells and mitochondria should work. But because of toxicity, the mitochondria are like the canaries in the coal mine, very sensitive to toxins. They're stuck as sugar burners with the inability to use fat as an energy source. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean you're fat or skinny necessarily. So it could have, you could be skinny or fat, but here you are at night now with the inability to use fat at the cellular level. So what does your body use? Muscle. Yeah. So you get skinny fat. Like when I was sick, I became skinny fat, right? It's like I was losing muscle. My metabolism was getting low. These people oftentimes go through, they're not hungry.
Right.
You see a lot of women, they're never hungry. They barely eat. And they'll even tell you, I barely eat, right? They don't struggle with cravings typically, but they get skinny fat. So they don't like their physique. Here's my papa.
Hi, Papa.
Come on.
We love dogs in the podcast.
We love dogs. Look at this little guy.
Love them.
I can pick this guy up.
Yeah.
Look at this little guy
This one should
right
join
here.
the podcast. Oh my God, with the little mohawk. Now you have to see, he has to stay in the podcast. That's
He's
it.
a lion. I will keep him here.
Yeah.
He's a little lion. Anyway, so you're going to block the little lion. Okay, anyways, so people are stuck as sugar burners. And then two things happens. Either you use muscle for energy, as I just explained, and typically you're not hungry, right? But you don't like the way you look. Or your body breaks every diet because you have cravings you can't resist. Why? Because your body's in a survival mode saying, hey, listen, I'm not going to use my muscle, but I'm going to give you a craving you can't resist. And so I always say diet failure is not your fault.
Yeah.
It's survival, man. It's like, so what the key then is becoming metabolically flexible, where you have to get your mitochondria using fat when you're not eating. How do we do that? I call it mitochondrial fitness, right? Where we force the body. First of all, you have to be detoxing at the cellular level first and foremost. Get rid of the cause. Then we take the mitochondria through some fitness in that we go into keto diets, and the average person takes a week or two to keto adapt, meaning use fat for energy. Typically, toxic people don't do that. And after a few weeks, we have to pull them out of the keto diet, go back into a higher healthy carbohydrate diet. A month or two later, go back into a keto diet. So we're kind of doing this fitness thing. And then fasting strategies, where we don't just necessarily do a water fast at first, but maybe we do a partial fast, forcing the mitochondria to start
functioning.
Yeah, to start functioning
Wake
again.
up.
Anyways, so there's strategies in my diet variation, feast, famine cycling that work. One of the things that I interviewed a scientist named Karen Verde some years ago, and she was one of the first, I don't know if she was the first, but that did a study on alternate day fasting is being more effective for weight loss resistance than any other diet. They compared it to
one day on,
paleo.
one day off.
Yeah, they compared it to paleo, they compared it to low carb, they compared all these different diets, right? And she showed that a day of fasting, okay, and then a day of normal eating. Day of fasting, normal eating, it worked better than anything. And I said, Karen, why is that? She said, well, it's because it forces the body to adapt. And it does that via hormone optimization. Okay. And that's why it worked better than any other diet. And that's really one of the starts that I realized that feast, famine cycling actually works better. So I have what I call my 5-1-1, where if you're going to intermittent fast for 5 days, you better add at least one feast day in, and you could add one fast day in as well. 5-1-1, mix it up. But most women do better with like 3-2-2, where they have 2 feast days a week, maybe even 3.
Depending on where you are in age, perimenopause, menopause, in your cycle.
Absolutely. So many women I find, especially with hormonal, thyroid, perimenopause, do better with more feast days. You can still have a day where you eat one meal. You could still have a day where you intermittent fast. You could have 2 or 3 days, but you better pay attention to those feast days. And what is a feast day? Because I'm always asked that question.
Let's also talk about that.
Because
it's not burgers and fries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't go and eat burgers, and God forbid French fries. But depends on the burger, I guess. Yeah,
exactly.
But anyway,
if it's seed oil free.
Yeah, exactly. But a feast day could be more meals if you're an intermittent faster. So that could be eating 3 or 4 meals that day. And I know it's hard because you wake up, you're not hungry. So maybe it's just a good, healthy protein, source, something like that. But you would eat more meals. Another feast could be eating higher protein. Maybe it's 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. So on average, because people always ask me that number too, try to get 100 grams of protein in on a feast day. Okay, especially if you're a woman.
And can you do that through like a smoothie in the morning, through eating eggs and things like that?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, and you might need a protein source. I find that most women in particular need a protein source. Yeah, exactly.
I start my day with a protein smoothie because it starts me off with 45 grams of protein.
That's right.
I'm like, okay, at least I'm starting the day right.
If you're trying to get 100 or so, 100, 120, it's like, you need that 45. And you may even, my wife, right? She's through menopause, but, I'm telling her, the older you get, the more protein oftentimes you need, especially as a woman, right? And then, so it could be high protein on those days. It could be more meals. It could be higher calories, fat, right? Yeah. It could be higher fat, which would bring higher calories. Yeah. And it could be high carb if you're low carb. So that's what, a feast day would be, I'm going to eat high carb. It could be fruit smoothies. It could be potatoes that day. It could be rice if you love it, if you do okay with those. But high carb will also remind the body it's not starving, because if you're low carb too long, eventually the body goes, I'm going to hold on to your fat. Yeah. Because I don't know how to
function otherwise.
That's right. And it's the number one thing it wants to do is survive. That's what it wants to do. So you're never going to beat that. So it'll say, I'm going to hold your fat. And then you got to get, again, that like fatty, look, and you're wondering what's going on. It's holding its fat. It'll even put water in fat cells to not burn them. And then you get dimply fat, right?
And that's what happens to a lot of women when we have cellulite.
That's right.
It's the toxins are not moving out. You're chronically inflamed. And it's not like it's your skin. It's what's inside the actual cells, which is causing that appearance.
Yeah. So you can break through that by feasting. So I find that women more than men, we have to feed them up. We have to give them more protein. We have to give them more feast days. Maybe it's 3 feast days a week where they have to consciously be like, these days, I'm going to eat feast, higher protein, whatever it is.
I know a little bit earlier we talked again about cellular detoxing. So for anybody listening to this, Dr. Pompa, what are some easier tips if they're like, okay, we want to sign up for Dr. Pompa's program, but things that we could do at home in the meantime? What are places that they can start to detoxify and feed their cells the good stuff?
Well, one thing is that your cell membranes, you mentioned earlier that phosphatidylcholine. I said, I love phosphatidylcholine. It's mostly an omega-6 fat. People run from omega-6, but no. Omega-6, bad omega-6, adulterated, rancid omega-6 is so dangerous. That's why it has a bad rap. And a lot of people eat too much of it. But fact is it is the key fat in the cell membrane.
Right.
Phosphatidylcholine is critical. So your cells have this bilayer of fat around them. This is where your hormone receptors are.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people are thinking that they're just hormone deficient when they're really hormone resistant. So the membrane is where those receptors are, where I'll use thyroid as an example. Your thyroid hormone has to connect to that receptor on the cell, get in the cell, and you have energy. Your brain works. You stay lean. Your mitochondria makes energy. All that because thyroid was able to get in the cell. But what if something's blocking it from getting in on that receptor? It's like your cell phone tower. If it can connect to that tower, it works. If that cement wall there probably looks like cell phones wouldn't work in this room very well. This cement keeps it from that tower. It doesn't matter if you have a $1,500 cell phone, right? Okay, so the hormone has to connect to the tower, get into the cell, magic happens. But resistance means that something drives cellular inflammation. We already talked about toxins, but these bad fats are driving this inflammation. Get rid of the vegetable oil, the canola oil, all these rancid omega-6. Phosphatidylcholine is something that people could start taking that you took.
Yeah.
And Body Bio, I've
love,
seen you mention Body Bio.
Yes,
they make the most stable, because you have to be careful with fats. Phosphatidylcholine, it's very sick and challenged people. A teaspoon to a tablespoon a day, we have them take. Why? Because it is the membrane, it is the perfect food for that membrane. Get rid of the bad ones. Get rid of your vegetable oils, your canola oils. Bring in the PC oils. Bring in the healthy, good, unadulterated. Well, see, I'm not a fan of fish oil.
Because a lot of it's rancid.
In fish. It's rancid, exactly. So I love fish oil in fish. I love vegetable oil in vegetables.
But not in that form.
Matter of fact, people don't realize fish oil has 5 to 6 double bonds. Okay, double bond. The more double bonds, the more heat sensitive it is, the more fragile it is. Seed oils, which a lot of people are understanding now are very sensitive to heat, which they are, have 2 to 3 double bonds. Okay, so you can see the fish oil is way more monounsaturated fat, meaning avocado oil, olive oil, they have 1 double bond, hence the word mono, not polysaturated. They can handle heat a little bit better. Saturated fats, tallow, butter, right? They handle heat much better.
That's why we cook with them.
They're saturated, exactly. So a little lesson on fats, but point is though, is even these saturated fats like tallow, like ghee, they actually, cholesterol and saturated fat, not your audience, but many people would say, if you said, what are the 2 most dangerous fats? They would say cholesterol and saturated fat. I argue that they are the cement of that cell membrane.
Yes.
So omega-6, hugely important. Unadulterated 6, very important for that cell membrane. That's why the adulterated ones are so dangerous. But the saturated fats and cholesterol stabilize that membrane.
Absolutely. I wanted to leave my audience, Dr. Pompa, with 3 easy digestible hacks for people that are your non-negotiables, your personal, everyday, weekly non-negotiables.
First of all, drink clean water. If you look at the amount of drugs in the water, you are drinking your neighbor's, estrogen, progesterone, or whatever drug they're taking, psychotropic drugs that you may not want. It is not getting filtered out in regular filtration systems in city water. Okay, let's be clear. So I like RO because it takes the drugs out. It takes fluoride out. It takes a lot of these chemicals out. RO has a little acidy taste. One that adds some minerals back in tastes better. I don't think you have to get minerals from water, but you definitely don't want a depleted water that tastes bad. But get a system, please, an RO system, you can get them for, $300, $400, $500. It's not an excuse, do it. That is a non-negotiable. I think today, a non-negotiable is, I know everyone can't afford organic. I wish I could make that a non-negotiable, but I will, people will get mad at me, but at least eat from the clean 15 and avoid the dirty dozen. If you can't afford, I think that today it should be a non-negotiable. For sure, we need to do that. I think a non-negotiable, I'll focus in on one thing. I think everyone should wash their clothes in healthy detergent, because here's why. They all have fragrances in it, because somehow clean means fragrance. I disagree with that. Your sheets, your clothes, you wash your clothes in these detergents that have all these chemicals and fragrance. The problem is this. It's on your skin all day long. And we put hormones in our skin transdermally. They're going right into your bloodstream all day long. And then you sleep in the same sheets all day. A non-negotiable, change your detergent. Wash your dishes in a healthy.
Correct.
So those are 2. Your clothes and so those are non-negotiables. Do that.
Thank you, Dr. Pompa. I've loved speaking to you, and I've been following you online for so long, so it was just such a pleasure to be able to sit down with you, bring you to my community, and really get to pick your brain for 90 minutes, and hear your backstory in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and I can't wait to have you on my podcast.
I'm so excited.
Because you've done so much for people, and
thank you.
You really have.
Well, it's platforms like yours that have inspired me to go in and look into women's health and what's triggering infertility and other things, and what's really going on with us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Biohack-it. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a short review. It really helps us reach more listeners just like you. Follow us on Instagram at biohack-it for exclusive content and the latest updates. Remember, your health is in your hand and curiosity heals.